First, we want to start with your career in CIA. What did your work involve? What were you doing in the agency?
Sure. I spent the first 7.5 years of my career as an analyst in the Directorate of Intelligence, specifically in an office called the Office of Leadership Analysis. It was kind of a psychological mandate that we had, where we served as the classified biographers of foreign leaders with heavy emphasis on the psychology of their decision-making. I did that for 7 years, but in the middle of that 7 years, I went overseas for 2 years to run the economic section at the American Embassy in Bahrain. Mm-hmm. And then in late 1997, I made an unusual switch to counterterrorism operations, went through all the operational training, and then I was assigned to the American Embassy in Athens to do counterterrorism, both against indigenous Greek terrorists and against the Arab groups that had taken up positions in Athens.
Mm-hmm. And what were the most shocking or disturbing practices that you have experienced while you were working for the agency?
Well, until 9/11, I had no objections to anything that I had seen or even heard. But post 9/11, it's as though the organization collectively went crazy. And we ended up creating a torture program. We ended up creating a kidnapping program called Rendition and Extraordinary Rendition. We had an archipelago of secret prisons all around the world. Then we set up Guantanamo and took people there indefinitely, never charging them with a crime and torturing them in Guantanamo. I can't tell you how many people underwent CIA torture and were killed during the course of the torture, only to then be buried outside the building where the torture took place. So there was a lot that I objected to after 9/11.
Mm-hmm. And you were imprisoned essentially for saying about these things. What happened in CIA? How did that happen? Why did they imprison you?
Right. I had a very powerful enemy in John Brennan. John was the number 3 ranking officer at the CIA. He was the executive director while I was there. And we have known each other for 35 years. I didn't respect John because of his ready embrace of torture. And so he was furious when I went public with the CIA torture program. And he insisted that the Justice Department go after me, which they did. And so in January of 2012, I was arrested and charged with 5 separate crimes, including 3 counts of espionage for telling the American people that the CIA was torturing its prisoners.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think that the place of CIA is in the American political system? What kind of influence does it carry in the political parties, but also over the president himself?
That's a very important question. And it's a question whose answer has changed over the years. What the role of the CIA in American politics should be is nothing, no role whatsoever. But that's not America in 2025. Now, oddly enough, the CIA is far, far closer to the Democratic Party than it is to the Republicans. That's a shift as to what it used to be. Donald Trump is an unusual president in that he really doesn't trust anybody. But he especially doesn't trust what he calls the deep state, CIA, FBI, NSA, DIA, all of these organizations that have, secret missions or whose employees carry security clearances. He believes that they have targeted him. We know for a fact that the CIA and the FBI targeted him at least in 2015 and 2016. He also believes that they may have had something to do with these attempts on his life. I don't think that's true, but he believes that it could be true. The FBI and the CIA leaderships until about 2015, would largely remain silent on American politics. Beginning with the election of 2016, they began taking sides. And so when you have letters endorsing one candidate over the other that are signed by 50 former CIA officers or 100 former CIA officers and FBI officers, I think that's a problem. I'm not saying that they shouldn't have an opinion. I'm saying that they should not be able to use their offices or former offices to try to sway other people's opinions. It's very dangerous territory.
Mm-hmm. You claim that the intelligence agency, when they're referring to the president himself, they don't use the word president, but they call him the first customer.
Yeah.
What does that refer to, and what kind of a argument can be made about the perspective of the agency for the presidency?
This is a division between the Directorate of Intelligence and the Directorate of Operations. The Directorate of Intelligence, that's the group of analysts that sit in the cubicles and think the big thoughts and try to predict the future. They call the president the first customer because everything they do goes to the president. Now, you want the president to read your work because you want to influence his policy making. So you have to target it specifically to him. He's the first customer. He's really the only customer that matters in terms of what the CIA is producing. The Directorate of Operations is completely different. All they need is for the National Security Advisor, whether he's close to the president or not, in this case he is, it's Marco Rubio. You want him to approve the operations or the covert action programs that you want to implement. So it's like two separate intelligence organizations, each with their own different goals vis-a-vis the president.
Mm-hmm. About the deep state, maybe the most famous concept talked by everyone. Do you think CIA is the deep state?
I do. Not that that's necessarily indicative of the CIA trying to do something to a president. But, yeah, and you don't have to call it a deep state. You can call it the state. You can call it the federal bureaucracy. You can call it, the government. The truth of the matter is we have this community of very highly skilled, very intelligent, and highly cleared sociopaths who sometimes you're unable to rein in. And when they start thinking about what they can do to influence American elections, and then those plans move into the area of illegality, then you have a problem. That's the deep state.
What is the working principles of such structure? How do they operate in general?
Well, see, this is something new that Americans are just beginning to understand. The way it used to work was actually very, very simple. The job of the CIA was to recruit spies, to steal secrets, and then to analyze those secrets so that the president could make the best informed policy. Simple. But that changed after 9/11. Now the CIA is a paramilitary organization. It kills people all around the world. It kidnaps people all around the world and either sends them to third countries to be tortured or brings them back to the United States to face trial. It runs its own drone program to kill people with. This is an organization that never existed before 9/11, a completely different organization. The American people are not unified on what they want the CIA to be. And so that's the rub. We're still struggling as a country with what we want the CIA to be. And again, we're seeing role reversal where the Democrats want a strong, bold, tough CIA that's out there doing anything it wants to do. And the Republicans now are more isolationist. They're more wary of foreign interventions, or any interventions except for Gaza, which is an entirely different problem. And they're more distrustful of the CIA just because we're now learning how CIA officials tried to deny Donald Trump the presidency in 2016.
Mm-hmm. You're talking about covert operations, assassinations, and everything. Do you see these operations being taken by rogue individuals inside the community, or you
No.
think that is in part of a chain of command?
Oh, it's very much in the chain of command. The New York Times and the Washington Post broke a story in 2012. And then it was more extensively reported in the New Yorker magazine about what was called the Tuesday Morning Kill Meeting. So John Brennan, when he was the Deputy National Security Advisor for Counterterrorism, would convene a meeting at the White House every Tuesday morning at 7 o'clock with CIA operations officials. They would draw up a list of the people to be killed that week. And then at the CIA, they would send teams out. They would kill the people on the list, and then they would meet again the next Tuesday to come up with a list of more people to kill. Well, these are not people who have ever been charged with a crime, right? They were never brought into court to face their accusers in a court of law, which is what the Constitution says they're entitled to. We just decided we didn't like their politics, and we were going to kill them. There was a very important incident in a hearing before the Senate Armed Services Committee during the Obama administration, where Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky asked the Attorney General, Eric Holder, does the president have the legal right to kill an American citizen in the United States when he has never been charged with a crime? Hemmed and hawed, and eventually he said yes. Now, that hasn't happened, we don't think, but overseas, we've killed American citizens who have never been charged with a crime. And to me, that's a criminal act. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. When you think CIA was at the height of their power, and comparably how strong they are today?
Well, it kind of depends what you mean. The CIA was at the height of its power probably in the late 1960s and early 1970s, where they were overthrowing governments and killing foreign leaders and just doing it on their own without any direction from the White House. That changed dramatically in 1975 with the Church Committee hearings in the Senate and the Pike Committee hearings in the House. Those two committees became the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. The CIA was stripped of its power from 1975 until 1981. And then Ronald Reagan became president and re-empowered the CIA, although within the confines of the congressional oversight committees. After 9/11, the CIA received a practically unlimited budget. They hired thousands more people, and they've done anything they want all around the world.
Donald Trump, when he was elected, well, before he was elected, he made the claim that he's going to drain the swamp. He wanted to dismantle the deep state. But in his first term, people have shown that it didn't came into reality.
No, exactly the opposite took place.
Well, in his second term, he made similar promises again, and we have seen a figure like Tulsi Gabbard being put on the charge of the entirety of the intelligence community in the United States. So do you think that a second term is more promising of dismantling the deep state, or you think that does he engage in dismantling at all?
It won't be dismantled, but he's much stronger and much clearer in the second term than he was in the first. In the first term, he was taken by surprise, I think, by the strength of the deep state. He made two very grave errors in that he named Mike Pompeo the CIA director. Mike Pompeo was a swamp creature. He was probably the worst choice for CIA director, or the second worst choice. The worst choice replaced Mike Pompeo. That was Gina Haspel, a 32-year CIA veteran. She was the deep state. We used to call her Bloody Gina in the hallways at the CIA because she was so perfectly happy to kill or to torture. And she even flew out to one of the secret prisons just to watch one of the torture sessions for no other reason than just to enjoy the experience. So he made very serious mistakes appointing these people. In the second term, with Tulsi Gabbard and John Ratcliffe, the CIA director, very good appointments. But the problem is he's only going to be president for 3.5 more years. And the deep state knows it can just wait until he's gone. And they're still there. That's what they do. They outweight presidents.
Mm-hmm. When you look at what the Tulsi Gabbard is doing so far, is that there are certain gossips that she's being sidelined to a certain extent, especially when it came to Israel and Iran conflict. And the president said that he doesn't care about what Tulsi Gabbard said as a intelligence. So, what do you think about her position on the cabinet right now?
Well, I'm a big supporter of Tulsi Gabbard. I think we need somebody there who was an outsider and is able to make bolder decisions. But Donald Trump really relies on Donald Trump when he's making a final decision. And so she can be out of favor one week and right back in favor the next week. They seriously disagree about Gaza, for example. They may even disagree on Russia, although I think Vladimir Putin is pushing them closer together. But if he's going to take advice from anybody, it's going to be from Tulsi. Now, she did something very recently that I think was important. She declassified CIA findings on the Russiagate scandal. Mm-hmm. This is after the CIA begged her not to do it because they said it would reveal sources and methods. It didn't reveal sources and methods. It revealed the names of CIA employees who had committed a crime, the crime being conspiracy to launch a coup to deny Donald Trump the presidency in 2016. So I think she's very gutsy. You know, I'm wondering, frankly, once Donald Trump is out of office, what does that mean for Tulsi? Where does she go? There are rumors that she would replace Secretary Hegseth as Secretary of Defense, which would be great for Tulsi, but she could just as easily slip into obscurity and, never be heard from again.
Mm-hmm. From what we see with the new Trump administration, there is a growing cooperation between the big tech and the government itself. Mm-hmm. So especially talking about like companies like Palantir that been recently heard. What do you see the status of this friendship? Do you think it's going to grow even more to a major spot?
I think this is the future. On a very small scale, when I first joined the CIA, now it's 35 years ago, more than 35 years ago, I was told that the CIA doesn't really invent these cool inventions that you see in the James Bond movies. It's easier and faster and cheaper just to buy them, right? You go around to these companies, do you have this kind of listening device or this kind of mini camera, and you just buy it. Well, now the CIA has, this is also post 9/11, the CIA has these multi-billion-dollar relationships with the most important tech companies in America, the biggest, Amazon and Palantir and all of Elon Musk's companies and Abraxas and IBM, and all of them are contributing, all of them. And so it's a good relationship for both sides. If you own stock in these companies, God bless, you're doing very well. If you're at the CIA, even better, because you have access to scientists and inventors and engineers that you otherwise would never have access to. So I think that this relationship is going to continue to grow for a very long time.
Mm-hmm. When you think about the Elon Musk Twitter files, which was bombshell to a certain extent when it came out, we have seen how much the intelligence community and the Pentagon itself was involved with the social media sites. And it was even showing us that they were making certain decisions to silence and censor people based on their opinions and on quote-unquote national security concerns. What happened to that under Trump administration? Do you think in social media there's still some sort of control mechanism like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think anybody really knows the answer, but I think I'm going to make a guess, an educated guess, and say those relationships probably have either been damaged or have ended. There's no legitimate reason for an active CIA officer or FBI agent to be placed inside Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or any of these other organizations. To do what? to spy on the American people and to censor legitimate political discourse? I don't even see how that's legal. And so my guess is now that they've been outed, it probably has come to an end.
Mm-hmm. Before the interview started, we were also talking about the Maduro situation, where Donald Trump put money on the head of Maduro. So how do you process this? Why does that happen, and what kind of an outcome it may bring?
Yeah, this relationship that the United States has with Venezuela is just mystifying to me. It goes like this. On the one hand, the U.S. government negotiates with the Maduro government in prisoner swaps, and that's great. And then on the other hand, Donald Trump offers a $50 million bounty for someone to kill or capture Maduro and then extradite him to the United States. It's unseemly. It's illegal. It's unseemly. It's not something that a head of state should be engaged in doing. And I don't know how it benefits the United States in any way. We still buy Venezuelan oil. Venezuela's oil, this is one of the things I learned at the CIA. Venezuela has the dirtiest oil in the world, right? The Libyans have the cleanest oil. It has the least amount of sulfur in it. Venezuelan oil is so dirty that it can only be refined in specialty refineries, and those refineries happen to be based in Texas, right? So the oil just goes very, short distance from Venezuela to Texas. Well, guess what? The Chinese are building refineries in the Caribbean. And so instead of the Venezuelans being forced to refine their oil in the United States, they can now have the Chinese refine it, and then they can just sell it anywhere in the world because there are American sanctions on Venezuela. I think that's what the motivating factor has been in this all of a sudden upgraded fight that we're having with the Venezuelans. That's point number one. Point number two, the New York Times said just this morning in a breaking news push notification that Donald Trump over the last 3 weeks has tasked Pentagon leaders with coming up with invasion plans for 6 South American countries. Why? Why would we want to invade South American countries other than the fact that they have good trade relations with the Chinese and the Russians? Mm-hmm. So I don't know what to make of this administration. On the one hand, it's peace, 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 and he wants the Nobel Peace Prize, and he made peace between India and Pakistan, and Congo and Rwanda, and Thailand and Cambodia. But now we're going to invade South America and give the Israelis anything they want. Mm-hmm. I just don't understand it.
Yeah. So the Russiagate situation, Donald Trump tasked Tulsi Gabbard with following more of that story with the investigation and everything. But it is also going into a direction where Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton could be under certain type of scrutiny, like investigation. Mm-hmm. And do you think that it will turn into something that may potentially go into the arrest of these former politicians in the Democratic Party?
Some of them, yes. Barack Obama will never be arrested. He has immunity thanks to Donald Trump. Because remember, when Donald Trump was arrested, he fought all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court says you can't arrest a president. If he does something that's illegal while he's president, that automatically makes it legal. And that's why all those charges were dropped against Donald Trump. Well, that applies also to Barack Obama. So he'll never be arrested. Hillary Clinton probably will not be arrested. Probably. Only because the statute of limitations has probably expired. But there are other important people, John Brennan, James Comey, James Clapper, who engaged in this conspiracy to deny Trump the presidency, and then they lied about it on Capitol Hill. That's only a misdemeanor, and you get a slap on the hand. But if the government can prove a conspiracy to deny Trump the presidency, there's the potential for real prison time.
Mm-hmm. When you go back to 9/11 times, the concept of mass surveillance came to reality, especially with the Patriot Act and everything. When you look into today's technology, we just talked about Palantir and everything. Do you see a truth to people's concerns on mass surveillance becoming
yeah.
a more significant threat to the American public.
Oh, without any question. There are three famed whistleblowers at NSA: Thomas Drake, William Binney, and Kirk Wiebe. And they went public with this information right after 9/11. And they were investigated and prosecuted. Thank God none of them went to prison, because they told the American people the truth, that this mass surveillance was taking place. Well, once it went public, you would have thought that the government would do something about it, and nobody did. And so this surveillance has continued all these years. Here we are 24 years later, and every 2 years, Congress reauthorizes mass surveillance. So yeah, nothing has changed since 9/11.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk more about Israel case, more specifically Mossad, because when you look at everything that happened since the 7th of October, there is a certain level of inconsistency when it comes to the performance of Mossad. Mm-hmm. Because at one hand, when you look into 7th of October itself, there is a serious mismanagement of the whole situation, and it ended up with a lot of civilian deaths on their ends and military casualties. But when you look into other operations, such as assassination of Nasrallah, of Ismail Haniyeh, or the other operation that happened in the 12th Day War, you are seeing a more brilliant way of conducting certain operations. So why do you think this inconsistency exists? You think that many people claim that the 7th of October was done like, the 9/11 conspiracies, that it was done with the acceptance of the Netanyahu government. Do you agree with that, or you think that it was just a series of mistakes?
Oh, no, I think it's more specific. I think people confuse and conflate Mossad with Shin Bet. This was a complete failure on the part of Shin Bet, not Mossad. Mossad is foreign intelligence. Shin Bet is domestic internal intelligence. And they were asleep at the switch on October the 7th. Now, the operations against Ismail Haniyeh and the other people involved with Hamas, whether they were in Tehran or they were in Doha or Dubai or whatever, the operations against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, those were Mossad operations, highly successful. But Shin Bet, heads have to roll at Shin Bet for allowing this to happen. I have a friend who's a very prominent journalist in Greece. And he went to Gaza a day or 2 days after the incidents that triggered the fighting on October 7th. And he said that he saw hundreds of cars, Israeli cars, with dead Israelis in them, but with mortar holes through the roofs of the cars. And his handler said that they wouldn't talk about those deaths. The bodies were still in the cars. But he said clearly the cars had been attacked by Israeli forces. We learned later that was part of the Hannibal Directive, that it was better to kill Israelis being taken hostage than to allow them to be held hostage. That's why so many of the hostages being released are dead. The Israelis killed them. But Shin Bet utterly failed. And I think that they failed for political reasons. These Israeli radicals have taken over much of the leadership as part of the Likud bloc, the governing bloc that's governing along with Likud. I'm talking about Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and some of these other radical right-wing crazy people. We know that Ben-Gvir had been told that the Gazans were planning something. And he responded to Shin Bet saying, that's nonsense. The attack is coming in the West Bank. And he wanted all eyes on the West Bank. So Shin Bet transferred much of their manpower to the West Bank. And then the Gaza attack took place. This was bad leadership, up and down. And when you put your government in the hands of people who don't know what in the world they're doing, things like this happen.
Mm-hmm. You talked about how the CIA is the deep state of United States. Do you think in Israel there is a similar situation between Mossad and the Netanyahu government or any government in general?
I do, without any question. And you know, what makes it so much more dangerous is that it has coincided with this period of Israeli politics over the last 20 years, where there's been a huge influx into Israel of Russian and Ukrainian Jews, and they have completely transformed the Israeli electorate. For all intents and purposes, there are no Israeli socialists anymore, right? The Labor Party has, 6 people in the Knesset? They're irrelevant. And they used to run the country, election after election after election until Menachem Begin. And they're done. There will never be another socialist government in Israel. Now, not only is it actively Zionist, but it's messianically Zionist, it's extremist Zionist, and it's only going to get worse.
I'd like to talk about Syria a little bit, and more frankly, Israel is also, as we know, that involved in Syrian politics, and even in some military operations been taking place in the recent months against the new Syrian government. So we are seeing that Israel's demands from Syria is a more fractured nation, while the United States is still, at least on the face value, they're insisting of a unified Syria. How do you think that if there is a divide between two countries' policies regarding Syria, like what outcome is going to show up in front of our eyes?
I think we should expect to see continuing chaos in Syria, despite the fact that Donald Trump apparently, loves Golani, the new Syrian president. He's lifted sanctions against Syria. That's all fine and good. But the United States doesn't have very much authority in Syria, not like the Turks and the Israelis do. And when the Israelis decide that they want something beyond the Golan Heights, who's going to stop them? When they decide they want to bomb Damascus and Damascus airport, there's no one to stop them. And so I think that the Israeli policy is to encourage chaos in Syria. If the Syrians are busy fighting each other, that means they're not fighting Israel. And I think that's what the policy is.
When it comes to Turkey, we are seeing that the Turkish government is more and more frustrated with the situation regarding PKK, YPG, and if it's going to be integrated into the new government or in Syria or not. And apparently Israel does not want the same thing to happen, and they're even opposing to protect PKK, YPG against Turkey, at least it's been claimed. So what do you think is going to happen? Is there a possible Israel strikes against Turkish elements in Syria? Do you think it's going to happen?
That's the key. I think that is a possibility. I think it would be a terrible mistake on the part of the Israelis. But if there are attacks on Turkish interests, at least they could argue to the United States and to NATO, frankly, that it's not an attack on Turkey. But, this is the thing about the Israelis. You can't trust them ever. Their policy is just to benefit Israel. And I'll give you an example. My very first week at the CIA back in 1990, we were told that Israel was ranked as critical threat for counterintelligence, that the Israelis were spying on the United States. They had
the United States.
Yes. They had spies all across the United States stealing our defense secrets because they had convinced themselves that we weren't giving them everything. We were giving them 99% of everything, but they wanted to steal the last 1%. Well, if they're going to spy on us, they're going to spy on you, and they're going to spy on the Syrians and everybody else in the region, the Egyptians, the Jordanians, the Lebanese, everybody. And so they've made a national decision to support and encourage chaos and infighting, because that benefits them.
Is there a chance that CIA may see Mossad as still a threat like this?
Oh, yeah, they still do after all these years. Yes, Mossad is a threat. This is one thing. I appear in a lot of podcasts, and we talk a lot about Mossad and CIA. And I hate when I see in the comments, Mossad and CIA are joined together at the hip. Mossad and CIA are two heads on the same body. That's just not true. Only ignorant people who don't know any better make stupid comments like that. The CIA and Mossad have always clashed, always, because the Mossad is constantly trying to spy in the United States and to outwit the CIA in Israel.
So in Syria, let's say that the doomsday situation happened and Turkey and Israel got into a kinetic situation. What is going to be the stance of United States in this? Do you think they will defend Israel in that?
No, I think they would have to try to jump in the middle and keep the two sides apart, if only because of the NATO Charter. An attack on one is an attack on all. It doesn't say an attack on one is an attack on all, except if it comes from Israel. And so the argument, I think, would have to be where whoever happens to be president would call the Israelis and say, look, you have to stop because we are obligated to come in on the side of the Turks. So you can't do this. And I think, frankly, that's why we haven't seen a kinetic confrontation between the two countries.
I want to see where British stands in front of all of this, because we know that they were pretty active in Syria and they are, frankly, pretty active in Ukraine as well. Maybe some even claim that they are more active than United States when it comes to giving certain intelligence to the Ukrainian side. So, and other people also looking into the material, like the equipment conditions of the British Army and everything, they question if they are still capable force like they were back in the day. So what do you think are the capabilities of MI6 and also the Great Britain in general?
And that's a good question. MI6 is a top intelligence service, but they're also very small. And they don't have a budget that even approaches the CIA's budget. So they have to be very selective about their operations. And Keir Starmer, I think, is a bigger problem than budgets. Keir Starmer leads from behind. He has to be pushed into a leadership position. And Brits are already disappointed in his prime ministership just because he doesn't seem to be one to take a bold step internationally, except recently to come out against the Israelis and to tell them to stop, and arguing that he's going to recognize Palestine in September unless the Israelis stop. They're not going to stop. And so the Brits, the Canadians, and all these other countries, the French, they're going to recognize Palestine. Where it comes to Ukraine, I agree with you. The Brits, the Germans, the Poles don't trust the United States on Ukraine, nor should they, because we have a serious split here in the United States between the Democrats who want to continue to support Ukraine with a blank check and the Republicans who just want this whole thing to go away. Donald Trump said during the campaign that he was going to end that war in 24 hours. Okay, well, we're 8 months into it now, and Vladimir Putin told him, you can't tell me what to do. And so the war is ongoing. Everybody thought that the deal would be that the Russians keep the Donbass, the Russians keep the Crimean Peninsula, that the Ukrainians be fast-tracked into the European Union, but they could never join NATO. Everybody thought that's what the deal would be. And now Putin says, I never said that was going to be the deal. He wants the overthrow of the current government, which is going to come anyway on its own. And he wants this so-called denazification. I mean, what is that? I'm not even sure what that means. What? There are a couple of guys that have white supremacist tattoos. What are you going to do? You fire them from the military. It's no big deal. So I think that the Russians just want a wholesale change in government in Ukraine. They want it back to pre-2014. And then maybe that would be the basis for ongoing talks.
I want to talk about more American domestic politics. And from what we see, especially in the MAGA movement, there are certain divisions that's emerging lately, considering what happened with the Epstein case and considering what's also happened in the 12th Day War between Israel and Iran. We have seen certain figures like what you said, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and many other like Thomas Mazie and other figures. They are raising their voices louder and louder each day. So and many pro-Israeli side claim that this is just an online case where the online influencers and everything are complaining about this to Donald Trump, but the actual people on the street does not really care about it. What do you think is the case? You think that is true, that people are mad, or you think it's just an online situation?
Honestly, I think it's a combination of the two, actually. I think that the Democrats underestimate the power of the online movement at their own peril. This is a real movement. And when you have the likes of Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massie, who is highly respected on Capitol Hill as an expert in the Constitution and the rule of law, I mean, those are potential leaders of this movement. And then couple that with 27 progressive Democrats on the Senate side. That's the beginnings of a movement. Mm-hmm. So I think that the powers that be, whether in the Democratic National Committee or the Republican National Committee, ignore this at their own peril. This really is a movement.
When you look at the Republican Party, you have the MAGA movement, but also you have the more establishment Republicans like Mitch McConnell.
Yes.
And but currently they've been quite silent and they've been sidelined when the MAGA movement has been more dominant in the second term of Donald Trump. So when Trump eventually goes away from politics, what is going to be the fate of the MAGA movement?
Yeah.
Who's going to be in charge in 2028 in Republican
that's the big question. Honestly, I think the MAGA movement goes away after a while because we don't know who the leader's going to be. There is no heir apparent.
No J.D. Vance?
It could be J.D. Vance. He's very young. He's in his 30s. It could be Ron DeSantis. It could be a black horse that we haven't really considered yet. But nobody has the draw, the charisma of Donald Trump. And, you know, Donald Trump's, 79 years old. He's an old man. So once he departs the scene, you know, and the neoconservatives, the Mitch McConnells and you know, the old school Bush Cheney kind of Republicans, they've been around for a very long time, and they've been quiet for the past 8 years, 9 years, but they haven't gone away. And once Donald Trump's not there to threaten them and bully them, I think they come right back up into the leadership.
Mm-hmm. When you look into the Democratic Party also, we are seeing a similar divide where you have the establishment Democrats like Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, well, she left, but still.
Hakeem Jeffries.
And you look into the other side where the progressives are raising their voices more and more, which we seem to be silenced on each election, on 2016, on 2020. Bernie Sanders was trying to raise his head, but it was always bashed back in. So today we are seeing figures like Zoran Mamdani showed up in New York City and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez being louder and louder. You think that the Democratic Party is going to be led by progressives in the future, or you think that it's going to continue with the establishment like it always did?
No way. It is an establishment party 100%. Mamdani was a reaction against this. It was his winning the nomination for the New York mayoralty was a reaction against the policies of the Democratic National Committee, which is really very much a right-of-center party. They'll deny it. They'll say they're left of center. There's nothing left-wing about the Democratic Party. They love war. They love Israel. They hate labor unions. They've gone against everything that they stood for. And that stretches back to 1972. The Democratic Party that we see today began in 1972. In 1972, George McGovern, who was a true progressive, he was a senator from South Dakota, won the Democratic nomination for president. And he won it on an anti-war platform to get the United States out of the Vietnam War. He lost 49 of the 50 states. It was the worst presidential loss in American history. It still stands today. Well, that's not true. Walter Mondale also lost 49 to 50 states in 1984 against Ronald Reagan. But be that as it may, it was a bloodbath. And so the Democratic National Committee changed its nominating rules, and they created this thing called the superdelegate. So you need, 2,175 delegates to win the nomination. but they made every national elected official, senators, congressmen, governors, lieutenant governors, secretaries of state, automatic delegates. And they all pledged their support for the endorsed DNC candidate. So a real progressive, a progressive insurgent like George McGovern can never happen again. The deck is stacked. Why would a progressive jump into the race knowing that he has to win 2,200 delegates to get the nomination, but the chosen candidate only has to win half of that? How does Bernie Sanders win 60% in West Virginia and Wyoming and not win one single delegate? What kind of electoral system is that? That's not democracy. It's fascism. And the Democratic Party loves that kind of politics.
Yeah. Thank you so much, sir. This was
Thank you. A pleasure.
Me too.